Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Don Knievel. I am the president of RecenterIndiana.inc. And Recenter is a nonpartisan organization that seeks to remind our legislators who they represent and who they should listen to. And we're specifically asking them to listen to the voice of their voters. But that's only half of the story. In order for legislators to listen, they have to have somebody to listen to. And so that's why we're doing these listening sessions, to have you come and express your views on the issues we're going to talk about, including mid-decade redistricting. So welcome to our first of 3 listening sessions on those topics. In order for the legislatures to understand what they need to do, they obviously need to hear you, and so we asked some of our representatives in this area to come. And I'm happy to say that at least one did. So if you're an elected representative, we sort of stand up and tell people who you are and who you represent.
Hello, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm here to listen. I'm Shelley Yoder. I am the state senator. My district is District 40. I live in Bloomington. I represent Monroe County. And I am the proud Senate Democratic leader. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you for coming, and we wish all of those who'd gotten invitations would have showed up like you, so thank you for doing that. So I'm now going to turn this over to Linda Heitzman, who is a board member of Recenter Indiana and also our treasurer. So Linda.
Great. Well, welcome. We are really excited that everybody is here tonight. And we have tried to make this an interactive and fun event for everyone. So this is all about giving you a voice. And so we actually have 3 ways for you to participate today. One, you will have noticed the QR code that lets you log into the online polling. So I hope that you've had an opportunity to log in. And what's exciting about that is we'll be able to see as we go, when we ask questions, what's the general feeling in the room. We were handing out cards for you to ask questions about redistricting. And we will then take questions for those. And toward the end, we will actually have an opportunity for you to raise other issues that are on your mind. We know that redistricting has been a hot issue, but it's not the only issue. And we want to hear from you. What are those issues that you wish the legislature would really address that are your most pressing issues? So that's kind of how we're going to roll today. Quickly on our agenda, we're going to do a quick test of how this online tool is going to work for us. Dr. Laura Wilson is our special guest here today, and she's going to kind of do a redistricting 101. This has not only been a hot topic, but there have been almost hourly updates in terms of what's happening around redistricting. And Laura is in the know, so she'll be able to share with us that. Then, as I said, we're going to open it up to hear what are some other concerns that are on people's mind. And finally, we'll wrap up and have a small reception before everybody departs and give people a chance to continue the conversation and talk with friends and neighbors. So that's where we're going to go today. So I see that a lot of people have already logged in. So anybody need help? Oh. We have 2 young assistants from Indy here today who are here to help everybody make sure we can fully participate. It's always interesting to see the emojis that people pick. You do not have to enter your whole name. You can enter whatever you want. It's just a way to kind of participate. Okay. So we're going to have a couple warm-up questions just to give you a chance to see how all of this works. And the first question is really pretty easy, and I think most of us have an opinion on this. Are we dog people or cat people or neither? Now you should, on your little screen, see that question. Do you see the question? And now you should see there are 3 options. And if you select an option, I can start seeing that people down here are actually voting. So we're about halfway done with the voting. We actually need some music here, I think, to some Jeopardy music maybe. Okay, a couple more of you. It looks like we could. Couple stragglers out there. Anybody want to vote who has not voted? Okay, this is just a warm-up. So let's see. Wow. I can't believe that. It's completely even. Wow. Now, I guess that's an interesting surprise. Okay. Most people actually say they're dog people, which is fascinating. Okay, that was easy. So the next question is, what is your morning beverage of choice? And you're going to have a few options, and this time you can pick more than one option. And the options are coffee, tea, soda, orange juice, or something else. Okay, people are getting the hang of the voting. Anybody else want to vote? I see one person not voted yet. Anybody? A little more time? Okay, and the survey says coffee. Clear coffee over tea. I wonder what the others are. There are a lot of others out there. Okay, and now one more question. Again, this one is a little bit different. This one is, what's your favorite ice cream flavor? And this time on the screen, you will be able to enter a word with your favorite ice cream. And if you have more than one favorite, you can enter more than one time. So if you want to start entering a few ice creams there, we'll see what the survey starts saying. And this is something called a word cloud. And so when people vote, you will see the size change. You will also see on your phone some of the options, and you can actually vote for things that other people have entered. So if a lot of people like strawberry, you can keep saying you like strawberry. But you can only vote for your option one time. So you can't, cheat the system. Okay. Chocolate and strawberry are very popular here. So it's kind of cool how things change, isn't it? Where you can kind of see where the room is headed. Okay, Cherry Garcia. Cookie dough's up there too. Okay, so these are the 3 kinds of questions we're going to be asking this evening. And we're going to let you weigh in on topics both related to redistricting and then what other issues are going to be on your mind. Okay, so we are almost ready to move on. Everybody's got the hang of this now, right? Okay. So we are very happy to have Dr. Laura Merrifield Wilson with us today. Laura is an associate professor of political science at the University of Indianapolis. I'm sure you have, if you follow politics in Indiana, you have seen or heard her on many of the venues that she appears on, including the host and producer of Positively Politics and a panelist on In Focus, which I believe is a Sunday morning program. So Laura has been speaking in lots of venues about this topic of redistricting, and I can't wait to hear what she has to share with us today.
Thank you. No, I wasn't pausing for the applause, but I really appreciate it, and that was nicely timed. Thank you, Linda, for that wonderful introduction. We're here to talk about redistricting, but not just talk, to listen, to hear what people know. Hopefully you leave with learning new things. And as Linda alluded to, there are updates daily in terms of what's happening in redistricting in Indiana. So likely you will learn at least one thing. But also being able to get a sense of where you stand on the issue, what you think is important, how this fits in, and what our legislature is doing that either aligns or doesn't align with that. So our first question here is really focused on that. It's the why. They say that in education a lot, right? What's your why? But why are you here? We do have great refreshments at the end. That's probably not what lured you in, though. Right? What is it that motivated you to attend here this evening? We're giving you a couple options, and this is one of those great questions where you can have more than one. Looks like several folks voting. Okay. Fantastic. Linda, could I borrow your handheld? Would that be okay? Is that okay? Okay, so it looks like a significant number of people opposed to redistricting. There's a lot of good data that shows many Hoosiers are. I really appreciate the family friend made me come. Good job, family or friend that did that. That's important. I do that to my husband all the time. We call it voluntold. He's a better person because of it, I'm convinced. To voice support for redistricting, absolutely. And certainly our state legislature looks like they're going through that process and to learn what's happening. And I'm really excited about that because at the end, however you leave, however you feel about it, I hope that you're able to learn something about the process and you leave having a better sense of what's going on, essentially. Okay. So as Linda said, I'm going to do a 101 on redistricting. We'll start at the truly 101, and these are actually two of my students from my 101 class, so they'll attest. This is the baseline, but don't worry if you know the basic materials. We're going to get more sophisticated as we go on. As you can see here, this is a picture of our current congressional map. We have 9 representatives in the state of Indiana in Congress. The divisions were created, and they typically are, after the census. So we had a census in 2020. That one was particularly laborious, intensive, as you might recall, because of COVID and other things. Our state legislature, like many, draws both their own lines as well as our congressional districts. And of these 9 districts, it's important to point out 7 out of 9 are Republican. The 2 exceptions are Andre Carson's in the 7th Congressional District. For Marion County residents, those are the middle and the north 6 townships. I live in Perry right here. We're part of the 6th, along with Franklin and Decatur. And then also Frank Mervan's 1st Congressional District. So those are the 2 exceptions that are both Democrat-dominated, Democrat-led. The remaining 7 in Congress right now are controlled by Republicans. Perfect. So just in terms of definitions. When we talk about districting, it's drawing the district lines, but most of the time when we discuss it, as a political scientist, it's a once every 10 years phenomenon because it happens after we do the census. That's what makes this particularly unusual. We call this mid-cycle redistricting. We don't usually have something like this. And districting really is just drawing the lines. Now, sometimes people confuse this with apportionment or gerrymandering. Let's tackle apportionment first. If you think of the word portion, it's making sure that all the districts have, generally speaking, the same number of people in every district. So I showed you the 9 we have. These are different variations of congressional maps. I know they're small, but humor me. I love seeing the difference historically over time. You can also see there's a point where Indiana had a little bit more representation. We one time had 10 congressional seats. We're now down to 9. But apportionment is making sure that all those districts have more or less the same number of people in them. There's this famous Supreme Court case called Baker versus Carr, and they said we need to measure districts based on people, not trees. That is why the 7th Congressional District, or at one time the 10th, is so small because it's in Indianapolis, which is an urban center. And why, of course, some of our other districts are larger, the population is more dispersed. That's apportionment. Gerrymandering is drawing the district lines for a partisan political advantage. And typically, our Supreme Court, actually have this down here, I'm skipping ahead here, but I think it's important. In Russo versus Common Cause and a number of Supreme Court decisions recently, the Roberts Court has said that gerrymandering on the basis of partisanship is unjudiciable, which in addition to being a fun word to say, means that the Supreme Court does not have a place in determining whether or not those maps are valid. The Supreme Court says that's a legislative issue. The legislators draw the maps. The legislators get to decide. So when we're talking about the gerrymandering, we're talking about ways that you can draw for typically partisan, but certainly political gain. I would add to this too, if it's important to you, racial gerrymandering is illegal. And so while we say, generally speaking, you can get away with partisan gerrymandering, you cannot gerrymander on the basis of race. And that would be something that could potentially come up in terms of the 7th Congressional District in Indianapolis. We utilize what we call the effects test for racial gerrymandering in the judicial branch, and that is to say, if they have drawn the lines in a way that's going to racially gerrymander to benefit one group and disadvantage another, If it has that effect, you can't use those maps. You have to throw them out. We used to utilize the intent test, which you can understand just based on the name is really problematic. We'd say, well, did you intend to racially gerrymander? Oh, you didn't? Oh, okay, then it's fine. You had to prove intent, right? So now we would utilize the effects test. When we're talking about different types of gerrymandering, the two most common that we see are cracking and packing. Right? Cracking a district is when you're splitting it up. So I'm going to highlight, these are older maps. You can see this is the map we had from 2000 to 2010. Over here is 2010 to 2020 before our most current map, which we also have displayed over here. You can reference at any time. Cracking is splitting up a group. So essentially, if you're drawing a little asterisk inside of, let's say, the 7th Congressional District, you give a few Democratic voters over here to the 5th. Maybe you give some to the 4th. Maybe you draw the 6th up here this way. So you split off those voters to make the district a little bit more competitive, but not too competitive. The ideal competitive district is 50-50. So cracking is going to splinter different groups. If you have an ideally competitive district and it's 50% Republican and 50% Democrat, your partisanship doesn't matter quite as much. What do people care about? The policies, right? The candidates. What are the issues du jour? How do you think each individual candidate or party is going to handle those? Those are truly competitive districts, right? But cracking is going to eliminate that, and that's one way in which you can draw the lines differently. The other thing, and I didn't create these, but I do appreciate that they rhyme because I think it makes it easy to remember. The other way you can gerrymander very effectively is packing. And that is more likely what we see, especially in the 7th Congressional District. So that's putting in together a lot of voters. You're essentially wasting votes because to win any given election, you need 51%. If you have multiple candidates, in Indiana, you can do it with a plurality. So you could have 35%, but let's just say 51%. Now to have a comfortable victory, maybe 55, right? You really don't need 60. From a political science perspective, 60 is a landslide. Because if you win by 60%, the most votes anybody else can have would be 40, right? That's a 20% margin. That's really wide. Most of our congressional districts are won within that 60 plus margin. So when you are packing a district, like, for example, the current 7th district, it's very Democrat dominated. Right? Republicans are going to have a really hard time winning in that district. But the same could be said from districts 2 through 6 and 8 and 9 for Republican, or for Democratic candidates rather, because they're so heavily favored for one party. So packing is essentially diluting. And I mentioned the Russo versus Common Cause, which I think is an important Supreme Court case. But this is just to reiterate that the court right now says districting is the responsibility of the legislature. And we've seen different Supreme Courts over time take a more proactive role and stance. And we have a very active Supreme Court right now, but this is not an issue they've really wanted to tackle. So with what we know when we're talking about redistricting, what would likely happen in our state legislature is probably what we would see. There would be judicial challenges, no doubt, but we wouldn't expect the Supreme Court to really change what might occur. Thank you. So I'm a big fan of data. Probably makes sense as a political scientist, right? And I do want to highlight, though I include where I found this information, I also have a QR code if you're interested, and we will also share the slides with you afterwards. So if you want to go back and take a look. This is just a great depiction of the United States in terms of the question I often get asked, just who draws the congressional maps, right? And some cases, these are the same people that draw the legislative maps. You can see here in Indiana, we're right by that little pink Ohio and south, of course, of Michigan. We, like many other states in this country, utilize our state legislature. They draw both their maps, which are not part of the question of redistricting, by the way. We redraw those every 10 years, but those aren't part of this mid-cycle redistricting. They draw their maps and they draw the congressional maps. So many states utilize this. I'm gonna highlight a couple because you may have heard them nationally, right? Texas has redistricted. We've heard Virginia is going through the process, Ohio, Missouri, California. California, you'll notice, is in that yellow or that teal color. Right? They have an independent commission. So right now they actually have a referendum that Governor Gavin Newsom introduced that would allow them to bypass their independent commission in order to redraw the district line. So they have a different process than what we or those in Texas have. But because our state legislatures draw the district lines, that is really the group, the party in power. They're the people that are responsible for deciding what those maps look like. And I will highlight here before we go to the next data point, I used to use this meme in class that I was obsessed with. It was a picture of a koala who had its mouth hanging out like this, and it had a leaf in it, and it said, "You mean to tell me our legislators pick their voters?" Yes, they do. Now, our Congress people don't, right? Our legislators pick their districts. But that is a part of districting. It's deciding which neighborhoods go in a district and which ones are going to be in a different district, right? Looking at partisanship, but all sorts of other characteristics. So I want to highlight two maps here, two data points, I should say, in terms of Congress and who is influenced, where this matters, right? Where does it matter? It's the House of Representatives. And I will highlight here, since this came out in June, it's actually 219 to 213. So there are 3 vacancies right now in Congress. But this was a really nice visualization. And it still shows you that the Republicans have control of Congress. Republicans enjoy a unified government at the federal level. They have the White House with President Donald Trump. They control the Senate, which I'll show you in a second, and also the House of Representatives. This is where it matters. And you can see just how close, this is the line, if you will, line of equilibrium, between those vacant seats, the Democrats and the Republicans, just how close that majority is that Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, has. So when we talk about redistricting, Indiana has 9 seats total. We would only have 2 that could potentially flip from Republican to Democrat, but that is still 2. And we've already talked about some of the other states that have been going through the process too. Where does this not matter? Right? It doesn't matter in the Senate. As you might recall, the Senate is drawn by state boundaries. There is the Indiana-Illinois Boundary Adjustment Commission, but that's a different thing. They met last week. If you watch In Focus, they were one of my losers. I think we have real important political problems in this world. I don't think we need to create more yet. But this is the U.S. Senate, and it won't matter in terms of redistricting. I would say, not quite as close. You do have the 2 independents, but they also caucus with the Democrats. Okay. Now, I think this is important to bring up too, because we said we redistrict every 10 years. There's a group called the Gerrymandering Project. They're based out of Princeton University, a little private school in New Jersey. You probably heard of them, right? And they evaluate the districts. They look at several characterizations that I'll show you in a second here. But you'll notice we're in the green. I think if green is good, green is go, right? And it certainly is in this case. We actually received an A rating for the districts that we had drawn for 2022. So in terms of evaluating our current congressional districts, we fare quite well. And because I always like to point these kind of things out, you look at, Texas, we've already talked about them, but even our neighbors to the east and west with Ohio and Illinois, for several other factors, the evaluation of their districts, looking at how gerrymandered they might be, how fair, how contiguous, how representative they might be, fared far poorer. Do you mind going to the next one? I'll show you, this is the kind of data that they look at, and this is one, certainly if you're into this, I am abbreviating it for the sake of, we called it Redistricting 101, right? It's not 501, this isn't the grad seminar class. But you can scan this to see their evaluation of every state. Some of the components we look for, partisan fairness, right? So how fair are the districts? How representative of the state are the districts? It's one of the features they look at. They look at compactness. There's actually a measure. So if you're curious, this is it's a geometric measurement when they're trying to measure compactness. Because if you've seen really poorly gerrymandered, or maybe they're really good gerrymandered districts, where it looks like a little snake, and then it goes out to one direction and goes to another, I always think they look like Rorschach tests. Like, what does this tell you about yourself? What kind of emotion does it evoke, right? They're not compact, right? Compactness matters in terms of a district because you want to include like-minded communities. Rare that we might value homogeny in that way in politics, but from a representative's perspective, it's really hard if you're representing part of the city of Indianapolis and then part of a really rural area. Your constituents are going to want different things. They're going to have different values, priorities. That's natural, right? But you want to have a collection of communities that make sense, so they look at compactness. Now, you can see here, and this is one of the places where Indiana does not do so well, is our competitiveness. If you look back at the 2024 or the 2022, 2020, I don't care what year it is. You look at our 9 congressional districts, almost always they are winning by landslide margins. So what that tells us is the competition is in the primary. It also tells us party-wise, they're not very competitive. And one of the exceptions to that would be Frank Mervan's 1st Congressional District. He had a close, what I would say close by Indiana standards, 5% victory over Jennifer Ruth Green back in 2022. And even 5% wouldn't actually fit in the category of close. We'd usually say a 2% race would be, by our standards, close. So they're not entirely competitive, but there are a lot of other values that give us A-rated districts in terms of what we see right now. So we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A and discussion, thinking about this mid-cycle redistricting. You got to hear me tell you a little bit about where we are. And actually, as we queue up, I'm just going to add some stuff that happened this week, because we started planning this for a while. Right? On Monday, our state legislature was told by the governor they'll be coming back for a special session. And it was initially announced that would be this upcoming Monday on November 3rd. Both the House and Senate have announced that they're not ready as a caucus, but constitutionally, by the Indiana Constitution, May 51, they have 40 days. And Organization Day is coming up on November 18th, so what I would suspect is the caucus will be getting their ducks in a row by that period of time. So that is like where we are at this point. Oh, yes. So just generally, what questions might you have? Sorry.
Would possibly the Supreme Court case of Louisiana versus Calais have an effect on racially drawing districts?
Yes. So the question was regarding the Supreme Court case with the state of Louisiana and the racial drawing of districts. It absolutely could. We would see, of course, what comes out of that. A lot of times when we're looking at districting, there's a lot of precedents you can use from other states that is applied then to the 49 other states, we would say, right? And we see that because we know that not every state draws their district lines the same. Some do utilize their state legislators. Some use other methods to draw those lines. But that is certainly one that we would look at. Absolutely. Thank you for that question.
Are there any other questions? Or if you've written your questions down on a note card, I'm happy to read it out for you. Friends, we have a political science professor in front of us. Let's take advantage of it.
I always like to pretend I must have done a really good job, but we know that's not true. Yes.
I'm going to come over to with the mic.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Sorry.
Yeah, based on the charts that we saw,
Yeah.
are there any legitimate reasons for redistricting other than the partisan politics?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. We don't usually do this. I'm going to start with that, right? One could argue there was a mass exodus of people after Hurricane Katrina to go back to the state of Louisiana, right? And so apportionment-wise, there might have been reasons those districts weren't accurate for several years, but we didn't go through a redistricting process for that state. We have no reason to believe that the population has dramatically grown, decreased, shift in any way that would require this kind of drawing. I think the president has been very clear it is for political reasons, and I should add to that, he's been very transparent. He would like this so that the Republicans in Congress do very well in congressional midterms. Typically, the party of the president and the party that's in power, and that is Republicans at the federal level, fare very poorly in midterm elections. Consider it, they've been in office for 2 years. As a candidate, you're never able to get everything done that you said you would. And usually it's the party of the president and the party in power. So we would expect somewhat of a double whammy against Republicans. So certainly that's what the president's looking at, and part of the reason he's approached several states and asking them to redraw the lines, to stack the deck, if you will, but also in preparation for the fact that they might lose power come the November congressional midterm elections. I have no reason to believe things have changed, and that is my opinion. Thank you for your question.
Yes.
Hi, we know that Governor Braun called a special session because he has the authority to do that as the governor, right?
Yes.
Do we think that maybe the reason they're not convening on Monday is because he doesn't have the support that he needs? And I mean, what what are the options? I mean, we know we can contact our representatives, but what are
Which
the
I think we
options
do.
for the representatives themselves
Yeah.
that don't want to do this and they're being strong-armed into
Yeah.
it?
Well, to your first point, was it last Wednesday, I think we heard from Senate President Pro Tem Bray saying we don't have the votes in the Senate. We didn't know from Speaker Houston whether or not they do or don't. But I would not imagine over the weekend a lot of things changed. So there is certainly that complication. I would also add from a practical perspective, our state legislature is part-time. Most of these people, if they're not retired, they're working other jobs. My state senator is also our university's lawyer. And she's very busy with that role. So I know, they expect to be gone on organization day. They expect to be gone January through February, March, whatever it might be. So there's that practical component too. But you're right, the Constitution allows the governor the authority to call the special session. The legislature has 40 days to determine when they come back. I imagine there is the political implication. I'm also empathetic to the fact that if I have summer off as a professor and you told me, actually, you're going to be teaching a class in July and it's a week from now, I'd be like, oh no, we're in Disney. So there's probably some practical component too. But the legislature has the authority to decide within that 40-day window when it is they return. We now know from both the House and the Senate that it will not, in fact, be on Monday. Yeah. Thank you for your question. Thank you.
I didn't quite understand the chart that showed our districts have an A rating, but on competitiveness, they're more like a DF.
Yes.
So what makes them an A? I'm not following.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. So largely the compactness and the fact that if you've seen a lot of times they'll say like the worst gerrymandered districts. And there's one in particular, not to call out Illinois, but we're in Indiana, so I feel very comfortable doing that, right? One of the Chicago districts that shows it looks kind of like a C, and it snakes through some highways, it collects a couple communities here and there. So by and large, the compactness, oh yes, thank you. Looking in terms of county splits, typically you don't want to split counties too many different ways because we recognize a lot of people, politics is local, right? So the fact that we have relatively few county splits is beneficial as well. And I think those two things in particular, if you look at all of Indiana's maps, we have done a really good job in terms of the drawing of the maps in that regard. It's not everything. And certainly the partisan competitiveness is an important factor, but those benefits might even say outweigh them in this case. Thank you. There was a question up here, Jocelyn.
Going just slightly away from redistricting, our state has been really reluctant to have referendums on a number of issues where the will of the people has been obviously somewhat mismatched with what the legislators are doing.
Yeah.
Do you see what do you feel is the rationale at the state level for this reluctance to hear from the voters?
Sure. So I can explain in terms of referendums and initiatives and recalls, those are mechanisms of direct democracy. I always like telling my students this. They've probably heard me say it several times. We don't have those in Indiana. We do not have any aspect of direct democracy. So when you're talking about like anytime people say, how do we change things, right? Calling, writing, social media, tweeting, whatever it might be, like reaching out to your elected official really is the best and only way to get your voice heard. And of course, when it comes to re-election time, you decide. You evaluate candidates and you decide if this is someone that you support and is aligned with your interests or they're not, and you vote accordingly. We do see several other states have referendums, and they're able to, I think, like coalesce the voice of public opinion and use that almost in a way like it's collateral, but also to bypass the state legislature. That's exactly what an initiative and referendum process does. And when our founding fathers at the state level were creating the Indiana State Constitution of 1851, probably much like the framers of the U.S. Constitution, they had a fear of the demos that Plato shared. They had a concern about giving the public too much power. So we don't have any mechanisms like that in our state. Ironically, if we wanted to, we would have to change the state constitution, and that would have to go through the state legislature. So, yeah. Thank you.
So my question is along the line. So Indiana has a very, very low turnout for voting.
We do, yes.
And so my concern with this, and this is, would this even lower our voting turnout? Because I feel like people don't feel like they're being represented, so then they're not going to vote.
I really, really appreciate that question. Can I just give you a little bit of unnecessary biographical information? I moved to Indiana in 2014 from Alabama, where I finished my PhD, Roll Tide. And Alabama is not known for having a really engaged population. But our voter turnout that year, I'll never forget it, was 26.2% in Indiana. And this was like, I just moved to this state, and I was like, oh, what's going on here? Now, in our defense, and this is gonna be like this session, right? It was a congressional midterm. In Indiana, we're one of a handful of states that elects our governor at the same time as our president. If I was rewriting the state constitution, I would change that because there's a conflation of state and national issues. I always feel bad. I love state gov, and people don't pay attention to the gubernatorial race because they're focused on the presidential, right? There's a coattail effect. There's a lot of problems with that. But to your point, could this depress voter turnout? It's hard to imagine it gets lower, especially for this particular cycle, and yet, hold my beer, challenge accepted, it's very possible. We're coming to a session where we don't have a governor's race. Obviously, it's not a presidential election cycle, but the kicker is there's no Senate race either. So the top of the ticket is going to be the congressional races, and oftentimes for Indiana in particular, which does struggle with voter turnout, those are the, aside from local races and referendums for schools, the lowest of the low. So I think that is really important in this conversation too. And then this isn't addressing your question, but it's what it reminds me of. When we say like, how do you get your voice heard? Aside from calling, writing, those sorts of things, well, vote. And proportionally, your vote does matter more when other people choose to abstain from the process. But we recognize, if we say like, what's the result? What's the consequence? Do we reward? Do we punish those that are in office right now? It's going to be a very small percentage in our state relative to other places of voters that make that decision. And I could only plead with you, and I just say this as a lover of democracy, a lover of competition, and someone who really believes you have to have dissent in order to have good policy. Please be one of those people that has your voice heard at the ballot box. Thank you.
So it's my understanding that in some states, you can't just go in and pull a straight ticket. You have to go in and vote for the individual offices. I know we don't do that here. I think one of the big problems is representatives will say, but that's what you voted for. No, they didn't. They didn't even pay attention to who was on the rest of the ballot. They pushed one button, and that's why you get certain people in office that shouldn't be there. So how, not that we'll ever do it in Indiana, but how does one go about making our state a state that makes people vote for the individual candidates they want?
Well, so the answer to so many of my questions are the state legislature. Sorry, Senator Yoder, you're like my answer here. But there was a proposal. It didn't go through, but this has been a conversation in Indiana. I believe for one of 5 states that still has the straight ticket option. And it's not to say, by the way, in other states you can't straight ticket vote. You're just going to have to take a little bit more of your time and go down for every single ballot. But every time I vote, I notice it too, where at the very top of the ticket, you can say, I just want to vote for all the candidates from this party, and how convenient, how easy. We do know with straight ticket voting, so if we got rid of that, that would maybe help, to your point, right? People would have to go through. But there is a large coattail effect. It's been declining historically, and I mean like decades declining. But a lot of times if people like the top of the ticket, and the top of the ticket's gonna be your federal executive, so this is president, then Senate, then House of Representatives, then governor, then you get to state legislative races, then you get to local, right? We can have very long ballots here in Indiana. But if they like the top of the ticket, they're gonna make a judgment based on that for all of the other races. And I really feel for folks who are towards the bottom of the ticket, like good and bad. But many people in 2024, no doubt, voters that may not have been quite as educated or informed and maybe don't even realize all the things they get to vote for, and I mean it, get to, they say, okay, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, how do I feel about them? And then straight ticket vote on the way down. And I will, I guess, be empathetic to the voter. We do have a lot of races sometimes. We have local races that aren't partisan, and we tend to have really low voter turnout for that because you've just taken away the one cognitive shortcut people utilize to decide if I like someone or I don't. Do they have an R or D beside their name? Well, then that determines my opinions on that. But to the point of straight ticket voting, we could eliminate that mechanism. It doesn't mean people wouldn't still utilize it. I think at the end of the day, like, how do you combat that? It's education. It's attending things like this. It's having conversations like this. It's learning. It's being prepared ahead of time to vote, quite frankly, just like you would do your research before you buy a car, before you make a decision in terms of what your next life move is. It's learning who you get to vote for, all the candidates, things like that. But we do have to also be realistic. A lot of Americans don't do that. Many Americans don't even choose to vote and exercise that civic duty. Thank you.
Here, I'll come this way. I'm happy to, thank you. How much will early redistricting cost taxpayers?
It's a great question. I don't know. I don't know the actual number. I've seen estimates that go as low as $250,000, so $250,000, up through it could be just under $1 million. A large part of that will depend on when our state legislators come back, because special session means, much like if I taught that July class that I wouldn't want to, right? They will be getting paid a per diem, and how long it takes them to go through this. We don't have a great comparison. So this is what I always think of. Like as a social scientist, I'm like, okay, so historically what's happened? What's our context here, right? You might recall in 2022, we did have a special session. That was after the Dobbs versus Jackson decision of the Supreme Court that overturned Roe versus Wade. It said states had the right to decide abortion policy. We already had a special session on the books. But because of that, the special session was delayed a little bit. It felt like about 3 weeks or so for our state to, first of all, decide what to do. We had extra money. That was the reason we called the special session in the first place. I say we. I was Governor Eric Holcomb at the time. But then also to essentially ban abortion in the state of Indiana. So part of it is like the amount of time it would take for legislators to be in actually convene. There's also the cost and the question of like making the maps, right? And what that looks like. I really wish I knew. It almost feels like doctor's visits. Like there's no upfront chart where you can be like, I'll take this, but I'm going to pass on that. That's outside of my budget range. We don't know exactly. There will be an extra cost, certainly. Thank you.
Another good question here. Is early redistricting to better serve Hoosiers or the administration?
I think that's one that people have their own opinions on, certainly. If you align with the Republican Party and certainly President Trump, there is value in pursuing this. But in terms of what Hoosiers want, the data that we've seen in public opinion polls overwhelmingly says no. And there was a great poll that happened, was it September or October? We're almost in November, so I should have just said last month, that showed 54% of Hoosiers disagreed with redistricting. There were about 30% that supported it. But what that tells you, slim as it may be, that's still a majority of people who say we don't want this. So I do think it depends on what your overall goal and outcome is, but a majority of Hoosiers have shown they're not interested in this process. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes? Here.
Thank you. I'm Representative Peggy Mayfield. This is within my district right now. You guys have not been shy about sharing your concerns and contacting my office. The number one concern I would like to see if you would address is it legal? Mm-hmm. And then on a more technical sense after that, if we run into the beginning of the regular session starting on November 18th, how is that handled?
Yeah.
Do you know?
So in terms of the is it legal question, that is the $1 million question. And I always like to start any legal question by saying I'm not actually a lawyer. But I think there will certainly be challenges, specifically with regards to the 14th Amendment in the U.S. Constitution, of whether or not this is constitutional there. In terms of the process itself, I'm fascinated to see, we have Organization Day on the 18th, right? Where we don't know when the state legislature will convene at this point. Does that sound right to you too? I was going to say, as an authority on the matter, I'm checking with you, right? So we don't know when they'd convene nor for how long. So these are really good questions that I feel like most of what we can say is we just, at this point, don't know. I don't think there's anything in our state constitution that prohibits or forbids it, but there will be questions in terms of representation, in terms of process that would come up. And I think part of what I'd be interested to see is if any rules are suspended to push through legislation. We have a process with rules mostly to avoid things like this, to avoid people just pushing through things very quickly. And yet I could see that process being sidelined, for lack of a better word, because of the interest in terms of the outcome. And I want to thank you for being here too, and for listening and being a part of this. Thank you. Yeah, do you want to go through?
One more? Do we have time for one more?
Can we do that? Yes, I can be quick on other things, absolutely. Also, you guys are so much more engaged than my classes. No, A+ here. Not Ian,
freshmen
they're great.
anymore.
Yeah.
My question is really, I guess, a procedural one, but the decision that'll be made on whatever date it is that simply redistrict yes or no, or will they actually approve a new map?
They'll approve new maps.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
they will be
so presumably those are in works then already. We've seen some in the papers, but
right, and we can't verify whether or not they're what they would go forth with, or whether they're accurate. We talked briefly about whether or not to share maps that we'd seen, and as a political scientist, I wouldn't feel right being like, it could be like this, it could be like a million things, we don't know. But they would be voting on the maps themselves. So it's not just a, do we redistrict, do we not? It's a, do we adopt this new congressional map for the state of Indiana? Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Will there be ramifications if we decide not to redistrict?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there certainly would be. I think Vice President Vance visited Indianapolis twice with this sole purpose in mind, right? There was the phone call from President Trump. He also invited leadership to the White House, maybe back in September. So there's a concern or a question of what would we not get from the federal government if we don't go through with what the administration wants. And I say that in a way as someone who loves studying history, and every administration is different. There'd be administrations where I think you'd be insulated from that kind of pressure and rebuke, and I'm not sure that's the case in these times right now. There's always ramifications when you're talking about job security for legislators. And this is where I really feel the pain, because our state legislatures are the ones that are taking the risk, because they'll be the ones that are drawing and adopting the new maps. They don't really benefit, these aren't their maps, but people who benefit are in Congress. So 125 of those state legislators will be up for re-election next November. All 100 of our Indiana General Assembly House seats, and half of our 50, so that's 25 of our Indiana State Senate seats. And when I talk to people and they're like, well, voters remember this issue, I think they will, actually. And voters tend to have short-term memories, as we all do, voter short-term memory here, right? But when you're talking about something, it was a year ago, this has been a pretty big deal. And it's extended over several months as part of the conversation. One of the questions we do have, because I know we're going to segue to this, but one of the questions we have are like, what issues matter to you, right? It might be redistricting is really important. It might be other political issues, but certainly that's going to be top of mind, I think, both for the legislators when they go into regular session, and it's a short session this year, but they will come back in January for that, but also as they're campaigning. And one more thing to your point, would there be ramifications? Most of our races are competitive in the primary elections, not the general. So you're looking at the May primary. And for Republican legislators who oppose redistricting, I would expect to see a challenger that will fight for them on that, challenge them in the primary, another Republican saying, I would have supported it, I disagree with it, this person is against the president, that kind of rhetoric. Thank you. I'll give you back. Oh, no, you're good. Oh, I'm good? Okay, perfect. So let's start with this question. We practiced with all the fun ones. Can't believe there's so many cat people in the room, but let's go to how would mid-cycle redistricting impact the voices and votes of people like me? And really and truly, this is a you. Like, how do you feel like this might impact the voice you have in Congress, right? The decisions that are being made right now, or it's government shutdown, so should I say not being made right now? Yes, thank you. Yes, so you can select any and all that apply. So it looks like several folks have voted. Okay. Yeah. So overwhelmingly, many folks in the room feel it minimizes our vote and voice. And looks like overwhelmingly many folks also said discourages us from voting. I'll tell you, of those two, the thing that concerns me most is the long-term impact. And if you think your legislator doesn't care about how you feel, that discouraging from voting, we know voting is a habit. It's a lot like eating healthy, which I choose not to do. It's a habit. If you start, you continue with it. And voting is like that as well. So if people feel disengaged by this election cycle, they get out of the habit. They choose not to vote, right? You could be talking, we're always just a couple years away from any given election. We're only 3 years away from the next presidential, right? And then people don't participate in that. Local elections that are off your elections, we might be even closer. Now, I did have some folks that said encourages us to vote, which is interesting. And at least one person, no impact, unsure, magnifies our vote and voice. And I also want to say, I really appreciate the honest unsure, right? There's a lot of ways that this can impact us, and sometimes it's a lot to take in and absorb. Yeah. So we're going to ask you your opinions on this. Given the information we provided and shared, the questions we've been able to address, how do you stand on this issue? Is this something that you would support or oppose? What would you encourage your state legislator to do? We know we don't have direct democracy in this state, but still, if we did, how would you cast your ballot?
We clearly have people unsure.
Are they allowed?
Can you vote? Do you have on your screen to vote?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just not showing us.
Okay.
There you go. So another one that feels pretty overwhelming. Many people saying they don't support this issue. I will say, in line with the public opinion survey data we've seen, a majority of Hoosiers don't. And this is we have limited public opinion data in our state, but there have been a lot of concerns in the public opinion polls that we've seen. Why would we go through with this? How would this benefit us? What kind of impact would this have? A lot of the questions we've heard this evening, and I think overwhelmingly, probably what's underlying this no is, if it's not what we want, why would we do it? Right? A lot of folks feel like that. And I want to honor and recognize those that do support it. Obviously, there are folks in the state legislature that do. Now, this article is dated by this point. I think this was last Wednesday, but there was a piece in the Indy Star that actually had the list of who was on the record in the state legislature for supporting or opposing redistricting. I found it interesting that both my legislators were the undecided. They hadn't said one way or another. Now, when you talk about these conversations behind closed caucus doors, we don't know what's said. We don't know who supports and opposes. A lot of times the votes that are going to be in favor, if they're able to negotiate this, these will be people that are from safe seats, so they won't likely have a challenger. They would likely overwhelmingly win. They can risk some things, which is, by the way, why we have a short session coming up, because it's an election year, right? Our state legislature was designed so when they have to deal with budget issues, which are hard, everyone wants more money, nobody wants less, right? They're insulated from that vote a little bit because the budget sessions are essentially a year and a half before the next election, whereas you have a short session during election season. I think you see some of that effect there. If my elected officials support mid-cycle redistricting, thanks. They've earned my vote, they've lost my vote, or I'm unsure. And again, appreciate the honest unsures if you're not, right? This is where, and I know we have some elected leaders in the room. I tell my students this all the time, but when I talk to public officials, and that's what they are, they're public officials, right? They're interested in our opinion, I hope. They're beholden to our opinion in terms of our vote. But I think this is where it really does matter to share. Right? When we say write and call, I ask my legislators all the time, and I do it in front of students because I want them to hear this. Sometimes students are young and cynical, and they'll be like, oh, they don't listen to it. You may not be changing hearts and minds with your phone call. They may disagree with you. They may be polite, they may not. It may actually be their unpaid college intern that responds saying, thank you for letting us know. But they care about numbers, right? I do think they care about opinions and positions. They care about narratives. And I think that's one of the things that's most important when we talk about reaching out to our elected officials, because we don't have initiatives, there are no recalls in this state. The election for our state legislators, in addition to our congressional representatives, isn't for another year and a week away, but who's counting? I know, not me. So being able to connect with them and share this opinion, especially now that we know they will be coming back for a special session, is very valid. Now, I mentioned this earlier, I kind of insinuated we want to know what other issues are important for you. And this is one of those, yes, this is a word cloud. So as you put in one word and you're able to upvote, we already determined in our practice round you can't artificially upvote something. I would have done that for strawberry, by the way, not a chocolate ice cream fan myself, but that's fine, I see you. Right? What are other issues that are most important to you? And if you can keep them to 1 or 2 words, so that way every time someone types it in, the font size gets larger to recognize its popularity. Wow. Healthcare, very dominant. We talked about Dobbs versus Jackson. Abortion is up there. Property taxes. Boy, this was a legislative session of property taxes, but I agree it may still reappear. Food insecurity, especially right now with the congressional shutdown and concern about SNAP. Representing Hoosiers. As a working parent, I appreciate preschool and childcare. Farming, rule of law. I want to point out too, healthcare is by far the biggest. There's also floating around healthcare access and cost. There's a couple of healthcare insurance premiums, so that can be exponentially larger. Environmental concerns, a couple times too. Water, right. Immigration. You know, one of the things I think is nice about this when we talk about the issues, we do seem to be one-sided in the room just based on our other questions, answers, and the feedback we've seen. But this is fairly reflective of what many Hoosiers say does really matter to them. And when you're talking about these issues, and we know we're coming up with a short session, as I mentioned, there won't be fiscal matters. Right? These are things that really are important to us. And this is why government, in its very essence, exists. Folks represent us, and they make decisions on our behalf. No. No.
So now we are going to give people an opportunity to say more about some of these issues. And we're going to start at the top. And it does look like the most common answer up here is healthcare. So we're going to bring the mic around, and for somebody who wants to, stand up and say something about what your healthcare concerns are, not personally, but from a policy perspective.
So I'm a nurse, and I have my doctorate in nursing. And I really am passionate about healthcare and seeing the patients that I take care of. I work in a mental hospital now, and seeing the patients that I take care of, some of the big, beautiful bill is going to really affect them and their level of care that they're going to be able to be given, and that's what I'm really concerned about that. And we already have a mental health crisis in this country as it is, and seeing this is going to really affect it a lot more.
I work in long-term care, and I have for years struggled to justify the medical need for treatment to insurance companies, specifically to people who are not medical providers, who are employed by insurance companies. I also have struggled with the layers of approval that are paid for by us in total, either in our Medicare or our insurance premiums or in our healthcare costs. So I I feel like there's no option for more affordable health care than to move toward universal coverage. I would love to know that there was some interest within the state of making that kind of change.
I'm really concerned about the SNAP benefits. We have a lot of poverty in our county, and we have a lot of food banks, and I know that their funds have been cut because all the churches now are scrambling and trying to get food and things brought in because people's incomes have dropped, and we're going to have a lot of hungry kids and a lot of grandparents that are raising grandchildren that's not going to be able to feed them. And it just really concerns me. I think I'm going to be fine, but I don't know if my neighbors are going to be fine, and that really scares me.
GPS signal lost.
Yes. I'll run this way. I could have.
First of all, mine is with Medicare and SNAP. I do guardianships for the indigent. And I have always taken people at risk. And what the big, beautiful bill has done and what our state legislature has done has put my clients at risks. And that makes me madder than, if you'll excuse me, a wet setting hen. Because I do not appreciate it. Because as being someone who is for the indigent, you know, like I had 35 people, I can't feed them all. And what are you going to do with them? What are you going to do with the people in the group homes that are in residential? I'm still in contact with them, even though in some regards I'm retired. But I am hearing just horror stories in staffing, which was the problem before this thing came along, and it's even more so now. Also concerned about the environment, of pulling back away and pulling off the safeguards. I do like to breathe, and I do like to drink good water, and I don't appreciate how they have let those go. And I don't appreciate letting off big pharmacies. I'm ticked on that, and I'm also a farmer, so I don't appreciate them putting all of this stuff on me. And where in the Sam Hill am I going to spend? Where am I going to send my corn? Where am I going to spend? Where's my soybeans going? I mean, am I going to even have a chance to break even this year? Or am I going to have to reach into what little savings that I have to pay the guy that does my farm? So, I mean, this is, well, anyway, I'm going to shut my mouth now, and I'll let her take the mic back.
Thank you.
I've been a CASA volunteer for 20 years. There are no foster care places out there available. There are no child care places available. And you have kids where we don't have anywhere to put them.
Thank you.
This ties into healthcare, but it also ties into many things, is moms. There is it's a scarcity ad in our state when it comes to, especially rural, but there's moms who are given birth and they have nobody. They have to return back to work a few days later, if that, they don't even have time to give birth. And when it comes to their support system, people say it takes a village to raise a child. Where's the village? And I know that people say, oh, you shouldn't depend on the state. But the thing is, every single legislator, I was looking at these bills, and there was so many bills. It almost makes me teary because I get so irritated. There are so many bills that could help. There was a doula, because doulas literally can save a woman's life. They literally have saved mine. And they can watch this bill and not give it a hearing. And that really pisses me off because there are women in these pockets. I have done door knocks for almost 48,000 people, and I've done door knocks, and I've seen the most rural mother struggling. And imagine her. She's not going to have family help. She doesn't have, can she have a job? The stories that she was telling me, this affects her children. This affects how she parents. This affects check out the bills that were said. No, that never got a hearing. All mothers, all men should look at these bills too and realize the benefit and take yourself and think of someone else's eyes and say, wow, could this benefit somebody? And not just write it off, because there's women going to die by unaliving and because it goes up to a year when it comes to the statistics. There's going to be women who are going to die. And if they're not dying, they're dying inside. And we just haven't gotten it yet. So when it comes to healthcare, in childcare, all of these, there is going to be people that are in these pockets that are struggling, and they are being unnoticed by our state rep, by our Congress, by all of them. And we've got to pay attention and look at these bills and say, hey, she matters too. There's a reason why these bills swept up. There's a reason why. So let's find out why.
Okay, well, I think we're ready to move on. We really appreciate all the input tonight, and it's fascinating to see all of the things that are on people's mind and how many common threads there are. And I think lots of us are affected by the things up here. So thank you for sharing those concerns. And, you know, if we didn't say so at the beginning, we are doing 3 of these sessions, and we're collecting the data from all 3, and we will be sharing it with your legislators. And hopefully they will pay a little bit of attention to the voices and the issues that we're all sharing here tonight. So thank you. Oh, come on. And now we are going to have another question. There we go. Oh. We are going to have another question. So we might not have technology on this question, so we might have to raise our hands because the technology gods do not always cooperate. So we wanted to ask, in general, how do you feel? Do you believe that your legislators, or your elected officials, care about your concerns? No. Any yeses? Oh, we have a yes.
Brave guy.
He is a brave guy. I can vouch for him. Yes.
I guess I could say yes, but it's not the most important thing.
So, next question, and I really wish we had our word cloud here, and unfortunately, but the question is, how are you, in like 1 or 2 words, how are you feeling about the state of politics in Indiana?
Second is more.
Concerned that it might follow the national.
Yeah, there's the 2 words.
It feels like a state in terminal decline.
Yes. Yeah. Trump servants.
Oh. Anybody feeling positive and hopeful, optimistic? Any optimists in the group?
I'm optimistic that the Senate hasn't been able to muster all the votes.
Yes.
I'm optimistic about that and somewhat surprised.
And hopeful.
That too.
And our final question of the evening. We spent a lot of time, and most of our time, talking about redistricting. And, you know, we want to know, was this conversation, did it further your understanding of the issues and the process around redistricting? Just.
Yes. Very educational.
Great. Well, thank you, Laura, very much for, you know, sharing with, you know, all of the latest and greatest up-to-date what's happening. And I think as we wrap up, I'm going to introduce Jocelyn Bear, who is Recenter Indiana's executive director. So she joined us this summer, and we are very privileged to have her, and she's been instrumental in helping us
And
organize.
I'm a good microphone runner, right? So thank you for bearing with me. First, if I may, a round of applause for Dr. Laura Merrifield Wilson. Thank you. Thank you. And I really want to recognize we have 2 elected officials who joined us today who are here to listen. And I want to thank Representative Mayfield. Thank you so much for joining us. And Senator Yoder as well. Thank you very much for being here. I would also like to recognize Recenter Indiana is just an amazing nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. And I'm so happy to be part of the team. And I want to make sure that you have met the rest of our team that are here today. Don Kniebel is our board president. And Linda Heinzman is our board treasurer. We have 2 other board members here today. Candy Lane is here, and also Phil Bremen. Thank you. Thank you. It has truly taken a village to put this event together, so we're really glad you're here. We appreciate not only you being here, but your voice and your participation tonight. This was all geared to hear what you had to say and to listen, so thank you. We know government works best when we use our voices and our votes. As Linda mentioned, we're having 2 more events later on this week. Please spread the word. Next Thursday night, we're in Beech Grove, and the Thursday night after that, we are in Fishers. We'll be sharing the feedback from you with our elected officials, and we are live streaming tonight, and the recording will be available. So if your neighbors were unable to join us, please go to indianacitizen.org to check out the recording, and you can relive this experience together. Lastly, we encourage you, you're probably not going to be able to go that last slide. I just want to mention again, we really do encourage you to use your voice and reach out to your elected officials. Not only Governor Braun, but the House representative that represents you and your Indiana State Senator that represents you. We had those phone numbers here available, but you can Google it, and we really recommend that you do so. So with that, we say thank you very much. We have a little reception outside, so please enjoy some refreshments, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. We appreciate it. Thanks.